Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different things going on in the college football 25 game, broke down the top 25 teams in that game, and some of the issues I had with those rankings, although all it means is that we're a little bit closer to this game coming out. But let's get into the segment 5 here today and break down a top 10 Tuesday for you all. We're going to do the best games in week 0 and week 1 as I see it. There's a ton to break down in these 2 weeks. It's a really, really good start to the season. And I obviously have some honorable mentions before we start because there's a lot of games that we have to include here that might not necessarily make it into the top 10. You have Western Kentucky going to Bama. You have North Dakota against Iowa State. Georgia State going to Tech. UNLV at Houston. You have Fresno State at Michigan. All of those games are going to be really interesting to watch and definitely could lead to some upsets of some Power 5 teams or Power 4 teams as we get into the early parts of this year. But let's break into the top 10, and let's start with a game that I think is just fascinating. South Dakota State at Oklahoma State. These are two teams that have a ton going into this season, obviously on two different levels, with South Dakota State being the class of the FCS right now and Oklahoma State being a team coming off a trip to the Big 12 title and a lot of things riding on this year, a lot of hype going into this new conference. Oklahoma State is one of those teams that thinks they can just take over and definitely be the team in this conference. They absolutely are one of those teams. We'll see if that kind of finds itself in this year, and definitely a team that absolutely can do it. They are a team, although a year ago, that had some games that you just wondered what happened. Mainly the UCF game where they walked in with a team that really played into a lot of the things that Oklahoma State likes to do, including running the ball, and they didn't do much. They lost 45-3, got absolutely dominated at the line of scrimmage, and I don't necessarily think that's going to happen here. There's obviously a bigger gap between South Dakota State and Oklahoma State than there is UCF and Oklahoma State, but it is to say, if Oklahoma State doesn't get a quick start and they let South Dakota State kind of get a couple of scores on the board, things could get interesting pretty quickly, that's for sure. But let's move on to number 9, and I have Colorado State at Texas. I think this is a game that, frankly, Colorado State is a really good team. Just a really, really awesome team, and they're returning their quarterback, Braden Fowler Nicolosi. They're returning Torrey Horton at wide receiver, an elite duo that absolutely can cause problems for that back end of Texas defense that right now I think is going to be okay, but it might take some time to really get going this year, and if they do, this team is going to have their way with them. I'll be totally honest, and this is a game for Texas that really, if they want to be the team that they can be this upcoming year and absolutely, have every ability to be and want to be this upcoming year, they won't play with their food. They'll dominate this team by 3 or 4 touchdowns. They'll move on to the Michigan game, and it won't be much of a conversation. If Colorado State hangs around, there might just need to be a conversation had around Texas, where this has been a thing around Texas for the last couple of years where they don't necessarily blow out teams that they should blow out. And it'll be fascinating to watch if this is one of those games or if they can kind of just handle business, move on to week 2 with that big matchup against Michigan and make everyone not worry. But definitely could be a game that causes a little bit of worry in Austin. But let's move on to number 8 here. Virginia Tech at Vandy is a game that is a little bit under the radar. I think this QB battle obviously doesn't necessarily jump off the page, but when you have Kyron Jones against Diego Pavia, you have two guys that can make the offense by themselves, can do really, really incredible things in the run game and in the pass game, and absolutely will have a ton to do with what their teams are going to be capable of this upcoming season. So I think Virginia Tech is one of those teams that, if they walk in, absolutely dominate Vanderbilt. We're going to have to watch them very, very closely as we get into this season because they are a very interesting team going into this season. But if they walk in and dominate an SEC team, obviously it is Vandy, but it doesn't change that they went into an SEC building, absolutely, dominated the team and walked out with a huge win. I think it's one that absolutely could define kind of that playoff conversation where if Vandy goes in and gives Virginia Tech a little bit of a battle, maybe they lean a little bit more in the SEC's direction. If Virginia Tech goes in and wins by 3 or 4 touchdowns, maybe the ACC teams win out at the end of the day when these conversations are happening. So that's kind of a under-the-radar game that could have wide-ranging implications for this year. But at number 7, I have Boston College at Florida State. This is a conference game, obviously, which gives it a little bit more juice. It is on that Monday night that has become kind of a staple around the week 1 in college football. I'm into it because it kind of gets me warmed up for that Monday night football game that's going to happen the week after. So definitely really enjoy that. This is a really interesting game because of the scheduling of it all. Florida State is coming back from Dublin where they will have played Georgia Tech. And there's going to be some questions. If they have won that game in convincing fashion, you're still going to have to deal with travel. You're still going to have to deal with a lot of the things that a lot of these players have never had to deal with in their lives. And then if you lose that game to Tech, you have a lot of questions, and you have to win this game and win it pretty convincingly to make your fans just calm down just a little bit. But let's break down another game, North Dakota State at Colorado. This is a Thursday night game in that week one, and I think it's just going to be incredible. It might just be the most interesting one of this entire bunch, if I'm being totally honest with you, because this is a North Dakota State team that is not scared of anyone. They absolutely can walk into pretty much any building across the country and give a team a run for their money. And Colorado's a team that I think is going to be a good team throughout the year. I think is going to improve from a year ago, but they're likely going to start slower than they finish. They're likely going to be a team that gets a little bit better as the season goes on, and this would be the time to get them if you're North Dakota State. So this is obviously going to be a crazy game. If Colorado is going to be the team that they want to be this upcoming year and that Dion has said they're going to be, they're going to win this game comfortably. They're going to win by 3 or 4 touchdowns. We're not going to have to think about this one, but if this game one's a game kind of like that Colorado State-Texas game, you got some questions around Colorado, and it's some of the questions that a lot of people have going into the season, but they would be amplified, that's for sure. Let's get into the top 5 here, though. We talked about this game before. Florida State at Georgia Tech over in Dublin, not necessarily at Georgia Tech by any means. This one's going to be really, really awesome. And obviously the dynamic of them playing across the pond is obviously going to be a huge piece of this conversation, but also Haynes King is really comfortable in that Tech offense. You can't necessarily say the same thing about DJ. Now, I think he's going to be more than comfortable, and Mike Norvell does a great job of putting quarterbacks in great positions to succeed, but it does play a part in this game. Georgia Tech feels like they're coming into this season as the team they're probably going to leave this season as. They're a team that has a lot of guys coming back, has a lot of continuity on that roster and on that staff, and I think they're going to look like the team they're probably going to look like throughout the season. I think the defense will get a little bit better throughout the season, but on the offensive side of the ball, they're pretty much going to be a finished product from week one, and Florida State likely won't be that way. So this is going to be a really, really fascinating game. Brent Key's going to have his guys ready for this one. I can promise you that, because he's not a guy that takes any of these games lightly. But let's move on to number 4. USC at LSU over in Las Vegas is going to be a crazy game. This is going to be as many points as you would like. They're likely going to score in this game because these are two defenses that I think, as we've talked about a number of times, are going to be much better at the end of the year than they are at the beginning. I think this is the time to get them, and these are two quarterbacks that are going to be really good this year. I really like both of them, Miller Moss and Garrett Nussmeier, and they're taking over for the 2 top picks in last year's draft, in Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, and we still have a really, really awesome quarterback battle. So it gives you an idea of how good the offenses are at both these universities, and both these teams really need a kickstart, whether it's LSU jumping into that SEC schedule with the big win over USC, or USC joining the Big Ten for the first time and jumping in with a huge win over LSU. So both these teams need a kickstart if they really want to do what they can do this upcoming season, and maybe it just starts on that Sunday right after week 1. So it'll be fascinating to watch that game. Miami at Florida is number 3, and this one was really close to being put at number 2. I just think, this is two teams, Miami's a team that absolutely is looking at the playoff. Florida's a team that, with this schedule, is just trying to keep its head above water. If I'm being totally honest, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. But overall, I think this is a game that I think Florida needs. When you look at that schedule, it's going to be tough to get to 7 or 8 wins at most. If you lose this game, it's going to be tough to get to 6 possibly. So Florida might just need this game if they're going to be remotely a team to be worried about this upcoming year. Now, Miami, on the other side, absolutely needs a kickstart into the ACC race and absolutely needs a little bit of that confidence boost. So both teams need this game a ton, but when I look at the schedule ahead for Florida, it feels like they really need this one, especially with this one being at home. So that will be a fascinating game. But number 2, Clemson at Georgia. This one's over in Atlanta. Definitely a game that everyone's going to be watching, and some of them are going to be watching to see Clemson go down and dunk on Dabo. Some people are going to be seeing it to see Georgia go down possibly, and a lot of this stuff is going to be really fascinating. But these are two huge teams, obviously, the two teams that took a pretty sizable bite out of the Bama dynasty, and they played to start the season in UGA's first title season in 2021, and UGA won a really, really gross offensive game that day, but overall, it's going to be an awesome one. And Clemson doesn't necessarily need this one by any means. They can do everything that they want to do without winning this one, but they got to show up. They got to show that they can compete with these teams, because if they walk in and just get beat by 14 points, 21 points, everyone's going to say they just can't compete anymore. Everyone's going to say that Clemson is done and the Dabo era is over in Clemson, South Carolina. It probably won't be the case, but regardless, that's what's going to be talked about. And then for Georgia, this is one you should likely take care of business. It's not going to be easy by any means, but Georgia's got to win this one if they're going to do what they want to do this season and going to be the team that they want to be, because they should dominate a lot of the teams on their schedule. But this is obviously going to be a tougher game, but they should absolutely win this one and walk into week 2 undefeated and just keep on rolling, really. And then Notre Dame at Texas A&M at number 1. I think this one really is just a notch above Clemson and UGA because of the venue. Them being in Kyle Field is special, and that's the way all these games should work early in the season, but that's beside the point. Also, a weird side plot is Mike Elko playing his former quarterback in Riley Leonard. So a lot of really interesting things going into this game. I think Notre Dame needs this one. We talked about it earlier. It's not necessarily the toughest schedule that they're going up against. They have 2 really big games in this one and Florida State later in the year. They're going to need both of them if they're getting into those playoff conversations. So I think this is one that you're walking into a really tough environment. You're walking into one of the toughest environments in the country, the toughest if you were to ask the people over at EA, and it's going to be really tough to win this one. But if you're a team that's going to go to a playoff and possibly win a national title, you would win it. But then if A&M walks away with a win, we got to start having a conversation about them, especially if Connor Wegman looks really incredible in this game. They're a team that could win the SEC. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but if Connor Wegman hits on all cylinders, it's a dangerous offense, that's for sure. So obviously, a ton of really incredible games in the first couple of weeks of the season, and it'll be incredible to watch them all unfold. I think there's a couple that are just a little bit of those kind of upset alerts that kind of happen early in the season, but also just some really, really classic matchups. You have Miami at Florida, you have Clemson at Georgia, you have USC, LSU, just so many great games that are going to be surrounding these first couple of weeks, and will definitely get us kickstarted into what's going to be an incredible season with so many awesome weeks. Week 2 is awesome. You have October 12th is maybe the best day of football that has ever existed, if I'm being totally honest. So it's going to be an incredible year, but we're going to get kickstarted pretty fast here. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages you could possibly need for all of the content you could possibly need around the world of sports. We have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.